I intend to record a video about ethics and household management, but ethics at large. And I will introduce a new document that I have produced. This will be a rather structured video because I took notes and I know what I intend to talk about. But first, a little bit of poetry. Not really poetry, but about God. One way of poetically formulating this is the full view of a society as I envision this in the most simple yet complete way. It's structured from bottom up and all the layers are interconnected. And it can be envisioned poetically. I thought about this, that God metaphorically could be an ocean, and within each drop of water in the ocean there would be a sea, and within each drop of water within each sea there would be a lake, and within each drop of water within each lake there would be a pond, and within each drop of water within each pond there would be a puddle of water, and within each drop of water within each puddle of water there would be another ocean. Yeah, that's one way of envisioning the infinite. What I mean is the categories that I have just showed, they are simplifications, but the metaphor is, for instance, in economics, that would be the ocean. Within the field of economics, there are seas and lakes and ponds and puddles and drops of water, etc., etc., and it works for every aspect. So, of course, it's not very poetic, but what I intended to communicate with this metaphor is that the infinite can be infinitely subdivided, and within each categorization of reality, the world really is like an ocean, and in order not to get lost or not to sink or to drown, one needs something to cling to and to like a compass to navigate at sea, one might say. And this is what I use and what I give, what I share with these documents. It's really a simplification to be able to navigate on the ocean of complexity. Yes, of course it's very simplified, but yeah, in order not to get lost within infinity, there has to be a compass, but it's infinitely rich in a way. And the poetic metaphor, probably the Indian philosophy, they use this kind of images. Maybe Leibniz used this in one of his writings, yeah, to express the infinite complexity. Yeah. So now I will show my document about ethics. Yeah, so just the time to switch the document. So the metaphor of the ocean, the sea, the lake, etc. Here, what I'm about to show is my view in a complete, complex yet simplified way of ethics and household management. So that's a window, in a way, within the frame that I showed earlier. So I'll show the document, and I will comment later. So it's as the other document from bottom up. So we have the body. I will just read out loud the categories. The body, that's how I envision this. So we have the body with food and diet, sleep, hygiene, exercise and health. Then the soul, psychology, psychiatry, psychoanalysis, vices and addictions, asceticism, fitness, appearances and lifestyle. The person, so yeah, there is, in a way as I envision this, a progression from the body, the soul, the person, the individual, the citizen, and the spirit, one might say. So here, the person, this is personal life, women and friends, family and marriage, education and upbringing, hobbies, skills, planning and insurance, prepping. Here we have budget management, or budget, shopping, minimalism, household management, clean your room, the schedule, or how to organize one's time, parenthood, instruction. So here we have education in the sense of upbringing. Here it would be education in the sense of instruction. Work and training, transportation, housing, gardening and permaculture, ecology, and the categories of the citizen, socialization, community, networks, the bureaucracy, civic life, information, cultural life, social competition and social status, and finally the spirit, autonomy, independence, wisdom, self-realization, and liberty. So this is the document that I will talk about in this video. It will be quite a long video, but I will comment in detail, and I will show books, references, and yeah, that's in a way that's a reworking of my view of home economics. It's more complete, and as I envision this, so there are various colors. I don't know if we see them clearly. So we have in green, that's what is connected to the body. In pink, what is connected to the soul. In purple, what is connected to what I call the person. It's in a continuity in a way. Here, the person means, I will comment later, but basically it's the interaction, interpersonal relationship in a way. In orange, these are the categories connected with the individual. The citizen, these are the categories in red, and the spirit in blue. And there is a logical progression. That's how I envision the system of ethics, the categories which structure the life of individuals, and how I envision this. It's complete in a way. It's not perfect in a sense that it can be rearranged, it can be modified, some aspects can be removed or added, but that's a full view as I envision this. And in order to lead an ethical life, there has to be order and an effort at all levels, or at least at most level, and that's an organic view of ethics and household management. In a way, household management would be the transition between the body, soul, and the person with the outer world, the social world. And in order to be balanced and healthy and to realize oneself as an individual, as I envision this, there has to be discipline, order at all levels. So yeah, I will comment this document. Honestly, I have drawn a lot of inspiration from the pyramid of Maslow, Abraham Maslow. That was, I think, a sociologist or a psychologist. It's kind of famous, the pyramid. In a way, it's structured from the most basic needs to the more elevated ones. So physiological needs, the need for security, the need for belonging, the need for recognition, and the need for fulfillment or self-realization. It's partly inspired by this, but there are also the various roles, the various aspects of the individual, physical, psychological, personal, social, and all the aspects are interconnected. Yeah. So that's the document that I have produced, and honestly, usually I'm very critical of what I produce, but here I'm quite satisfied. It can be improved, but I will not spend a lot of time improving this, because in a way that's a prototype, but it's satisfactory, and it can be, and it is very useful. Yeah. So that's what I had to say as introduction. Yeah. So now I will comment my notes. I prepared this video in broad outline, and I will start by praising Nietzsche. I will praise Nietzsche. I hadn't read German philosophy for a long time, and I decided not to. That's part of my addictions. So I have given up. I've made great efforts to give up on this addiction. But Nietzsche is not really. He's a philosopher, and a German one, and a great one, of course. But he's not a metaphysician. And precisely, I've granted myself the privilege of reading Nietzsche. That's Ecce Homo, and it has done me a whole lot of good. And I will what Nietzsche talks about. Basically, Nietzsche is kind of an antidote to Hegel sometimes. The importance of physiology, diet, and the climate in the health and development and assertion of the self is very important for Nietzsche. That's kind of his view as kind of an antidote to idealism, the excessive, one might say. So, physiology, diet, and the aspects which are considered lower in classical idealist philosophy are very important. And for the people who are idealistically inclined, there are not many, but Nietzsche can be really a counterweight which brings balance and sanity. Yeah. So, and I'll just make a comment. I already knew, but actually, Nietzsche, he was very critical of the Germans. He identified as a Pole, partly from Poland. He had Polish blood. He identified with the Polish nobility, and he was very in this book. He criticizes very harshly the Germans or German culture. Yeah. But it's always refreshing and appeasing. I'm not sure it's appeasing, but it's refreshing, and it's a healing for the soul to read Nietzsche. Yeah. So I will begin with a good joke, a theological joke, inspired by Nietzsche, about Christianity. Yeah. So let us imagine humans talking, and they would say, God, we are sinners, we are wicked, dear Lord, who is gonna save us? Help us, dear Lord. And then God says, don't worry, I will send Jesus. And then Jesus, he absolves a human, he removes the sin, he heals everyone, he fixes the problem. But then Jesus, he says, oh, Christianity, this religion, it's sometimes it's unbearable. The guilt, the remorse, the shame constantly, the torment. Father, who is gonna save me from Christianity? And then God, he says, don't worry, Jesus, I will send you Nietzsche. That's a good joke. That's a good joke, I think. Yeah. Nietzsche is maybe the guy who... Jesus is the guy who saves Christians and everyone eventually, not only Christian, but who saves everyone from sin and wickedness. But those who need to be saved from Christianity, well, they have to turn towards Nietzsche, I guess. That's an antidote to... yeah. So that was my homage to and my praise for the philosophy of Nietzsche. Yeah. Now, about... so the introduction, it will be quite long yet. And then, once I've finished the introduction, I will comment rigorously and systematically the document that I've produced while giving references. But now I intend to talk about the global village and the internet, will and intelligence, home economics, what people sometimes envision as a collapse or a crisis, about politics, sexual energy, religion and ethics. And then, once I'm done doing this, I will comment systematically the document. Yeah, so about the global village and the internet. First, I recommend reading this book and studying this book. It's really great. We live in a global village. We all live in the same world. There's only one world. Yeah, and what happens with the development of the internet is that all the knowledge from all over the world is made available, and eventually that's a process. But eventually, everything is in the process of being revealed. Yeah. So, just to illustrate this book, No Place to Hide, Snowden, the NSA, and the US surveillance state. Of course, there are data being collected with internet connection, banking transaction, surveillance in public spaces, etc. But not only data are being collected from everywhere, all over the world through technology, etc., but knowledge as well. And I have understood the process, and the overwhelming majority of people haven't understood yet. Yeah. But for instance, this means the death of private life. One of the characteristics of villages, no matter how big they might be, is that everyone knows about everyone else eventually. So the problem of private life in the age of the internet, eventually it will have to be solved in a way, because it's, as I record this, we are in July 2023, it creates all sorts of problems constantly. The surveillance, the monitoring with the internet. So the current legislative structure is not adequate, is not adapted to the development of technology, which moves too fast, and the spread of information. And there's one tendency which consists in censoring, controlling everything, but it cannot be censored or controlled. So there has to be, and it will happen eventually, a global consciousness emerging, at least at first in the countries which are the most developed and which have access to technology and the internet to regulate themselves, not through bureaucratic censorship and regulation, but to regulate the use and the sharing of information. And that's how a global consciousness emerges, because the world is interconnected, and as of now the legislative structure is in the process of being outdated, but also the consciousness of most people is not yet fully aware of the process in a way. People, they need, precisely, that's the metaphor of the ocean, they need to cling to something stable and fixed, and I understand this psychological need because I need this as well. And the document about ethics that I will talk about consists in helping others, whoever they might be, find stability and order in their own personal and local life. But eventually, just to take an example, the category of the nation state is no longer adapted to the world in which we live. But it requires an enormous amount of evolution and growth of the mind to be able to understand the process through which we all evolve in a way. Yeah, but that's not the main topic, but simply I will read the few notes that I've taken. The totality of world knowledge is made available. What I have been offering with the first document is a structure, a map to help categorize, classify, to make sense. Yeah. Also, I wrote here a simple philosophical distinction. Reality, for most people, it means what they perceive through their senses, plus the relationships, the interpersonal relationships that they have. So, most people who are not used to thinking a lot, for them, reality means sense perception, their everyday reality, the people they interact with, and what they perceive through their senses, their experiences in a way. So it's kind of limited in scope and extension. It's important, but it's limited. And from a philosophical and scientific perspective, das Wahre ist das Ganze, the truth is the whole, the totality, and each individual human perceives, wherever he or she finds himself, he perceives a tiny fragment of the whole, a part of the totality, the universe. But let us remain within the realm of the global village. Let us talk about planet Earth and human interactions. But it exists within the universe and it obeys the same laws of physics, etc. But the totality, the whole, because through our senses we are limited, our eyesight, our ability to hear, smell, touch, taste, etc. is limited de facto, and just our eyes, no matter how functioning and performing they might be, even someone with a very good eyesight, the range of electromagnetic wave that can be perceived, namely light, is limited. There is an electromagnetic field and waves all around us, but we only perceive a tiny fragment because of the structuring of our bodily sense organs. There are waves like infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, etc., or radio waves that we do not perceive because the frequency either is too low or too high or too or not adapted. And the same with sounds. There are many sounds which are vibration of molecules of air that we humans do not hear, and that some dogs do hear, for instance. So what I'm trying to explain is that the totality, cannot be perceived through the senses, through perception, because it is limited. It has to be reconstructed and apprehended through the mind, because when we think, and when we think rigorously, we think universally, but a lot of people, either they do not have the time, the ability, or the interest to think holistically, so therefore they are fragmented. But the truth from a scientific standpoint is the totality. That's why I promote a holistic way of thinking. And I wrote, for instance, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the central bank in America, is a global problem, for instance. That's why it's not only of concern for the Americans, but for everyone eventually, because the banking system is interconnected, and the monetary policies, the interest rates of the Fed, they have an impact on the American economy, of course, but on all economies over the world, and not only on the economy, but on politics, geopolitics, etc., etc. That's why it should be a global concern, not only for the Americans, but for everyone eventually. And I take another example, patriotism. I understand why people have a psychological need to identify with a specific country, but I just take an example. In the modern world, because of the interconnectedness of information, the economy, the circulation of ideas, commodities and people, etc., you are not necessarily, except through legislation and law, obviously, but otherwise you are not necessarily more connected with some of your fellow citizens than you are with other people who might be much further away, but with whom you have more connections in a way. In terms of cultural references, mindset, behavior, beliefs, or sometimes even economic or financial interest. With the modern means of communication, it's possible to send donations to people at the other half of the planet. And in an interconnected world, people, they do not necessarily interact with their fellow citizens more than they do with people from other countries. That's why the nation state is not adapted to the development of the economy, the modern development of the economy, the circulation of information, etc. And here, another remark from the case of continental Europe. The historical borders of European countries, they have changed a lot, but they do not match the ethnic composition of traditional Europe. Here I'm talking about classical anthropological Europeans, because there are ethnic distinctions. Sometimes, in the case of Germany, for instance, Germany and Poland, or Germany and Austria, or Germany or the Netherlands, there are similar ethnic groups which have different nationalities, and similar nationalities which come from different ethnic groups. For instance, the Germans of the northwestern part of Germany, they are ethnically very similar to the Dutch, for instance, and sometimes the Germans of the southeast parts, they are similar sometimes to some Poles. They are partly Slavic, some of them, or to the Austrians. So, or in France, the northern part of the country and the southern part, like in Germany, but differently, but they are not the same historical ethnic population. In Italy as well, in the north and in the south, people are ethnically distinct. So there are the distinction of ethnicity, language, nationality, sometimes also citizenship, because there is the country of origin, and then so it asks the question, what defines? It raises the question, what defines an individual? Is it the genes, the language, the nationality, the country of residence? And I know another example. There are sometimes people of Turkish origin in France, which are closer in terms of cultural affiliation with Turkish people of Turkish origin in Germany, so they feel more closely. Sometimes they feel more closely connected to their fellow Turkish compatriots in Germany than they feel close to their co-citizens in France, and the same for some people of Turkish origin in Germany. So the modern world is a big confusing. I wouldn't say a confusing mess, but it's confusing, and that's why basically patriotism, when the country is too huge, it no longer makes sense. Or often it becomes statism. Because when the country becomes too huge, either too populated or too large, or too fragmented culturally, ethnically, religiously, etc., to identify with the country often means the state, because the state, when there is no homogeneity within the people, the state is usually the glue which sticks the individual members of the country together. So often, and it has been historically true in Europe, often, not always, but often, patriotism has coincided with statism, basically. And just a remark here, Germany in the year 1800, during the Napoleonic War, at the turn of the onset of the 19th century, Germany, the Second Reich, was composed of hundreds of tiny entities. It was an empire, but it was politically very fragmented, contrary to very centralized states like France, or to a certain extent even England. I wrote, the nation state is no longer adequate to the various economic, cultural, demographic changes, and it has often been an artificial construct. The example is that which I've just mentioned with Germany, for instance. And also, I share knowledge publicly, potentially with any member of the global village with an internet connection. So I do this out of a sense of duty, one might say, but I do this for myself because I need to have the feeling that I'm doing my part, and I will continue to do so, but I share information because I feel that it's my responsibility. So I do this to help others, but also to help myself. Okay. No, I will just show briefly the document again. So I comment, now it's about will and intelligence. I offer the structure of what I call ethics, or the system of ethics, or the structure of an ethical life. So I give the structure, as I envision this, references, books that I will show later, that I've already shared, but I will show them later, and also pieces of advice. But then it's up to you, whoever you are, to actualize ethics, namely to fill the form with the content, which is the will and intelligence. Namely to act. Here it's just the map, but then of course every category, in a way, or most of them, they have to be implemented in a way. Cleaning your room, managing your budget, struggling against vices and addictions, taking care of your diet, etc., etc. It's an effort that everyone has to perform on his individual level. Yeah. But having the structure can be very useful, and it has helped me a lot, and I know it can help others as well. So I wrote, as I envision this, ethics is different from morality, precisely because ethics has to be practiced. It's not about judging others, it's about practicing what ought to be, das sollen, what should be done, yeah, to live harmoniously with oneself and with others eventually. And I wrote, I'm not a moralist. I've read Nietzsche and Spinoza. I'm often non-judgmental, and I often have no problem with most people's behaviors as such, namely as individuals. But the problem, here I take example, people who smoke or drink alcohol or who are sexually loosened, promiscuity, etc., etc. I have no moralistic problem, in a sense I'm non-judgmental, but the problem is if or when it is collectivized, and when behaviors which are often morally condemned in most religions, when it affects others, it becomes a problem. I do not have personal problems with people who drink alcohol, but if they get drunk, and then if their behavior hurts others, then it's problematic. That's my view, actually. That's why, yeah, the problem, if actually the problem arises when these are not sins, but the vices or the behaviors which are often considered by religious people negative or detrimental. The problem arises when they become collectivized, and I wrote, if what I call socialism, if it is used as a politicization, I wrote, if resentment is politicized through interventionism, statism, collectivism, what I call socialism, then I have a problem. Namely, I just take an example. If people, they want to behave promiscuously on a sexual level with other consenting adult individuals, I will not judge them individually, but if women, in modern language, if some women have a high body count, as they call this, and then if they get rejected by quality men, because quality men do not want to invest time, energy, dedication, resources in sexually promiscuous women, then if these women, they feel resentful, and they use their resentment, they politicize their resentment through political feminism, which is a form of socialism, then it becomes problematic because it affects the whole community. Yeah. In terms of diet, if people want to eat junk food, that's, in a way, their pleasure and their problem, because it brings problem. So I do not judge them if they don't take care of their diet, if they don't want to. But if they fall prey to the preachings or the false promises of politicians who say, capitalism is responsible for obesity or whatever, if the negative consequences that some behavior bring on individual, if it brings resentment amongst these individuals, and if they politicize their resentment, that's where the problem emerges in a way. That's why my view is libertarian. In a free society with limited government and no collectivism in a way, people ought to be free to behave however they want, but then to take the responsibility of their potentially negative behaviors. But if the negative behavior fall onto the rest of society, what I call socialism, that's a problem. Yeah, so yeah, but of course there are really behaviors which are not morally wrong on an individual level, but which bring collective disasters. The example of alcohol, if people can restrain themselves, no problem, but the empirical data shows that a lot of people can't restrain themselves, and then it brings a lot of negative behaviors, car accidents, domestic violence, sexual abuse, when people get drunk. So that's why here these are the problems of the complex problems of the libertarian. I will not talk about this, but basically the solution is private property and religious morality, and people should be allowed to reject certain types of behavior. For instance, if a community or a neighborhood or maybe an entire town decide that it will not accept people who smoke or people who take alcohol, if that's their collective decision, then how do they choose this? That's a complex process, but they should be allowed to reject or to accept if they want to, but then to bear the risk, the collective risk, but they should be allowed to reject people whose behavior does not fit with the standards of the community. But it requires local decision and private property. So my view, to simplify, is that for the classical vices or sins or deviant behavior, as they call this, it should not be prohibited in most cases legally, because if the state starts to regulate through compulsion and prohibition most behavior, then the powers of the state grow tremendously. So in most cases the prohibition should be kept to a minimum, but the counterpart is that people should be allowed to build their private communities, and if they want, so if they decide so, they should be allowed legally to reject the behavior that they find inappropriate. If that's how religious community function, if people collectively on a local level decide we reject alcohol, they should be legally allowed to refuse people who drink alcohol or smoke or to promote sexual restraint, etc. That's how societies function in a way. It has always functioned like this, except in the West over the past few decades. There has to be collective restraint and yeah. So what I share with this document is, and I will comment later, is the material and ethical foundations of peace and liberty. There can be no harmonious interaction between individuals, peaceful interactions, and there can be no liberty without discipline and efforts. And I wrote the Constitution of the United States of America has enabled and promoted and granted success for all groups historically. Maybe not enough, maybe not as much as could be wished for or hoped for, but it has succeeded. The Bell Curve, the book by Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein, proves this with statistics. The US Constitution, and America, the United States of America, has enabled and promoted and granted success for all. This is why it is truly universal. People of all backgrounds, all origins, all ethnic, religious, cultural backgrounds have succeeded and still do more than anywhere else. So that's the most meritocratic society in the world. Maybe it's not as good as people would like it to be, but it's nonetheless probably the most meritocratic in a sense, granting opportunities to everyone and fulfilling the promises of the ability to succeed. Yeah. Then, about home economics, I wrote, I'm not interested in home economics or household management as such, but as an empirical individual, I live alone, so I have to order and organize my daily life. And here, a little bit of poetry. I wrote, I'm a shooting star, and I leave stardust behind me because I travel very fast, sometimes faster than light, and I leave trails of stardust in my path. So I never intended consciously, I mean, except over the past few months, but it was not in my plan to build a system of ethics and household management, but I had to organize my daily life. And I'm very systematic in my way of thinking. That's my autism and my German metaphysical mindset. So if it can help, yeah, I leave trails of stardust behind me. Yeah. So I wrote, whoever you are, you can, if it helps you or if it might help others, you can print this map, this structure, you can modify it, you can change it, complete it, improve it if you want to. You can distribute it anonymously. You can print it on paper and distribute it. You can add the references, the books, the pieces of advice, etc., etc. That's one of the purposes. For instance, you can list all the great books which talk about diet, all the great books about psychology, about hygiene and sleep, about women, and etc., about prepping, etc. I will partly do this. I've already done this, and I will do this in the later in the video to show a lot of books. But you can do this. You can use this as a map, and if it enables you to improve your life and the life of your surroundings, I wrote, if you want to write a book about home economics or household management while using this as a structure, you can. I share the map. If it can help people, I will be satisfied. Yeah. It has helped me. And I will do this myself. I intend to print this and to share this with people who might be interested because it can help. Yeah. Then about what sometimes, especially the preppers, envision as a collapse. I wrote, the current socio-economic political system in the Western world especially is not sustainable. For many reasons, and I will list a few reasons briefly. And what I call my system of ethics, in a way, it's kind of an antidote or a parachute or an insurance or a stabilizer or a compass or a help to alleviate, reduce and stabilize the rapidly moving, changing socio-political-economic structure. Yeah, formulated differently, for the reasons that I will mention, there are rapid changes, significant changes in the Western world, but actually in the world at large, because everything is interconnected. And people, in order not to get lost and to find stability psychologically, materially, they need, I know this because I need this as well, they need a structure, and this is what this system of ethics provides. And here I've listed briefly, while preparing the video, some reasons why the socio-political system of the Western world is not sustainable in the long term. The most important reason, in my view, is simply a shift in consciousness. Because of the spread of information through the internet, it's becoming much more difficult to fool people when all the information, the knowledge, and the data about every topic is made available on the internet in real time. That's what I call later the discredit of the figures of authority. The figures of authority, the politicians, the scholars, the journalists, the public intellectuals, etc., they are being discredited because there is a counter view to everything they say, which is made available. There are alternatives emerging, alternatives in politics, economics, science, ethics, etc. Yeah. Other reasons. In the case of the West, there is a demographic decline, an aging population, declining birth rates among the native population of Western countries. So in the long term, it's not sustainable simply because demographically white people do not replace themselves. They do not have a sufficient amount of children to sustain themselves on the long term. There has been an excessive flow of immigration over the past few decades. It has really become excessive, so it brings already, and it will bring about social problems because the quantity has become too large in too short an amount of time to be able to assimilate or to sustain the society. Yeah. There has been, and still is, anthropological decadence because of the welfare state, sometimes sexual loosening or even degeneracy sometimes, gender confusion, a sense of frivolity. So there really is a decadent, an anthropological decadence. It's not sustainable on the long term. A society cannot be based on frivolity, complete frivolity, sexual promiscuity with no restriction, people who become completely dependent on the welfare state, confusion of gender, traditional roles, etc., etc. It's not sustainable in the long term. There is also partly a decline in intelligence, not only in the West, but in most societies. Edward Dutton and Richard Lynn have provided works on this. So in the longer term, it's not sustainable either. In the topic of economics and finance, the inflationary policies of the central banks, the unsustainable debts caused by borrowing to finance the welfare state or the retirement system, etc., it's not sustainable. The dollar has lost, according to Ron Paul, 95% of its value over the past century. there are an enormous amount of policies, what the libertarians call the welfare warfare state, the welfare redistribution and the wars abroad of Western countries, interventionism. It's financed through borrowing and printing money or creating money out of thin air, and on the longer term it's not sustainable. Ron Paul talks about this very often. Also, another reason, the pace of technological innovation makes a lot of people redundant economically, because modernity has become too cognitively demanding. The new jobs which are being created, usually there are still jobs which can be performed by a lot of people, but the change in technology with the internet, robotics, artificial intelligence, etc., the creative destruction of the improvement in the technological process, it has existed. This criticism, the idea that technology would bring too much unemployment, it has been a criticism which has existed for more than 200 years. But with really the internet, the change is quantitative, but actually it's a change of measure, because really with artificial intelligence, the modern technological means, the robotization, etc., really it's not just a quantitative change. There are really a lot of people who can no longer compete in the economic arena, because even high cognitively demanding jobs like lawyers, accountants, etc., they are being replaced, or they will be replaced by robots or computer programs or whatever. So it's a qualitative change in a way. The replacement of labor by capital has always existed. Already 200 years ago, the workers who were being replaced by machines were complaining. The Luddites in England, Luddites, the people who destroyed the machines because they did not want their know-how and their skills to be replaced by industrialization. In a way, the craftsmen or the workers with high level of skills who were being replaced by modern means of production, mass production, etc. So this criticism, this anti-technological criticism, is more than 200 years old, since the advent of industrialization. But really with the internet and artificial intelligence, the change is not quantitative, it's really qualitative. There are really a lot of people who are being made redundant, and the modern society, they are too complex and too cognitively demanding, and there are a lot of people who cannot keep up, and a lot of jobs which are kind of fake because they are state-financed jobs which are financed by borrowing. So here the Marxist analysis is partly correct. There comes a moment when, in the long term, the cognitive requirements to participate in a productive fashion in a modern economy will have become too demanding for most people. The people who talk, Brzezinski, who talks about tititainment, to keep the masses dumbed down. The idea that's from Pareto, but basically that 20% of the most intelligent, they produce 80% of the wealth. It cannot be necessarily, it's not always empirically valid, but basically more and more people are becoming economically redundant in modern, highly developed societies, and it's more and more difficult to keep up with the pace of technological innovation and progress. Another reason is that I've already mentioned the discredit of the figures of authority. The politicians, the scholars, the journalists, they are losing, with the advent of the internet, they are losing their credit and their authority, because precisely there are alternative viewpoints which are made available in real time. So whenever they say something stupid or false, or whenever they try to manipulate or to hide information, it's being revealed and corrected. So it's not sustainable in the long term, but even in the we have already seen the results through the Trump, Brexit, etc., and the rise of populism in Western countries. The people, through alternative means of information on the internet and the emergence of new elites through the internet, the people seriously challenges the legitimacy of the official, classical, institutional, institutionally selected people who go through classical universities and the classical methods of selection in the political game, etc. Populism in the modern West, simply, it can be envisioned as the people who do no longer trust their elites. There are reasons why. Yeah. Also, the reason why the system is not sustainable in the long term: economic decline due to interventionism, what Mises calls destructionism. The state has gained too much influence in most Western countries, and the rise of the bureaucracy, the constant interventionism, it's not sustainable. A society cannot pay people not to work and punish those who create wealth and regulate everything and put hindrances and restraints on the entrepreneurs and favor unproductive endeavors, etc., etc. That's a libertarian view, in a way, a strictly economic view. Not only there's the problem of inflation and debt, but also of economic interventionism. The more free societies, they will always outcompete the more regulated ones, simply because they grant to their citizens the right and the opportunity to create wealth and to improve the capital structure, etc. Whereas those who are heavily regulated, they lose in the long run. Yeah. And finally, because on the long term, modern means of production and consumption are not sustainable ecologically. Erosion of soils, pollution, deforestation, etc., etc. So for all these aforementioned reasons, shift in consciousness, demographic decline, anthropological decadence, decline of intelligence, inflation and debt, the pace of technological innovation, the discredit of the figures of authority, economic decline, and ecological unsustainability. In the long term, all these, there are maybe others, but they collide in a way, and it's not sustainable. So in order to stabilize a declining system, a return to ethics, an ordered, structured view of ethics can help a lot, and I will promote this document because it has helped me a lot, and I know that it can and will help a lot to find stability, clarity, order in a complex, moving, sometimes confusing time. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Here I will briefly talk about politics and sexual energy. Well, is that the most interesting part of the video? I don't know. I will list what I wrote. Men's sexual energy, the sexual energy of men, can be envisioned as a creative energy. In a way, that's what creates life from a biological standpoint. But more than that, it's in a way it's pure energy and creativity. And from a psychoanalytical standpoint, it has often been envisioned by the psychoanalyst that the creative achievements of men are a means to channel and to transcend and to express, in a way, a sex drive. It's not just that, but the great achievers in science, art, politics, innovation, etc., in a way, that's a means to achieve artistic, technological, economic, political, scientific endeavors. It's a means to express their sexual drive, in a way, to transcend, to use it for productive endeavors more than just sexual intercourse. That's a means, an expression of a creative force. So it's partly connected with the sex drive, in a way. And I wrote, women, in a way, they metaphysically, one might say, physically as well, sometimes, in a way, they absorb men's life force. They suck up the life force of men, in a way, through the lips or the vagina or both. And I wrote here, it's partly derived from Julius Evola, but actually it sounds dumb, a little bit comical, but actually it's kind of profound. The penis, the male sexual organ, in a way, it symbolizes the limit of sexuality for men, because it's limited, it is finite. Men, Evola makes this remark in the Metaphysics of Sex. It sounds stupid, but it's very intelligent. Men can see, and actually they do see, except really if they have really a fat belly or a really small penis, or both. But actually if they have a not too fat a belly, usually men, they can see their penis, and they notice, no matter how long it might be, they notice that usually it has a limit, it is finite, and therefore, symbolically, in a way, this limit to their sexuality, their finite aspect in terms of sex, forces and enables men to focus on higher non-sexual endeavors like technology, engineering, economics, law, politics, art, science, philosophy, because men, they quickly understand that they cannot realize themselves through just the sexual aspect. They have to aim higher. They have to seek the infinite beyond sex, precisely. In all the endeavors that non-human animals cannot achieve. Law, politics, engineering. I mean, there are some animals who are great engineers, but like the bees or the ants or those who build dam in rivers with wood. I don't know how you call this in English. Yeah, but usually non-human animals, they do not do science, art, philosophy, law, etc., etc. Whereas the female sex organ, the vagina, in a way, it's infinite in a sense that it has no limit, no apparent limit. Therefore it's unconscious, it's unlimited, and that's the view in Indian philosophy, for instance, of the Kali Yuga. That's the age of unlimited, unrestricted desire, in a way. And men, they become much more conscious of the limit to their sexuality than women do, precisely because, very simply, they can see that they are limited, whereas women can't. Therefore, women can be unconscious of their sexuality much more than men are. That's why there is this drive for men. That's my interpretation, but Evola partly agrees. There is this drive to transcend the purely physical, sexual aspect, and to aim higher. Yeah, in men. I wrote, a man should not make a woman, a grown man, a grown-up man should not make a woman the purpose and goal of his life. He should seek transcendence, in a way, beyond. The wife, the woman, the wife is just a stepping stone, in a way. It can be a help, it can be helpful to have a muse. Historically, the poets, the great poets, have drawn inspiration from a muse, a female figure which has inspired their artistic or scientific expression and endeavors. But men have to aim higher, to have higher aims, higher goals, to realize themselves in, for instance, politics, art, or science, etc. Metaphysically, symbolically, matter, the material world, represents the fall, because what is material is that which is heavy, gravity, and that which falls, and that which has its center outside of itself. That's why material objects are attracted, heavy material objects are attracted by the center of the earth, because their own center is outside of themselves. Like women they need a center outside of themselves. They need to have a man as the center of their life, whereas men, they can be and they have to be their own center. And light, as opposed to matter, is that which is elevated, that which is light as opposed to heavy. I wrote, women, in a way, they are always falling, and men have to rescue and save them from themselves. That's the traditional view of the princess which has to be rescued. But symbolically, here it's a mixture of metaphysics, mythology, physics. The fall, symbolically, is the fall into the material world. Because precisely the material world, matter, is that which is falling. And here, the connection with politics, the state is that which stands. State means, it comes from the root to stand. It's a phallic symbol, in a way. Historically, before the modern bureaucratic societies, the head of the state, the prince, the king, the emperor, was a phallic symbol, a symbol of authority and vigor and dominance. And feminism, it can be simplified, but it can be envisioned as simply women marrying the state. The feminist women, they have not only feminist, consciously feminist women, but women in the age of feminism in the West, they have simply married the state, and it can be checked by the tremendous increase in state legislation, interventionism, bureaucracy, budget, spending, control of every aspect of life over the past century, one might say. The state of mass democracy is also the state of mass interventionism. So I wrote, feminism creates a totalitarian dystopia because women, they need to feel safe constantly, which leads to an excess of regulations, rules, restrictions, etc., etc. And also, symbolically, the state is the phallic symbol, and the masculine, the embodiment of the masculine aspect, symbolically, because it has an infinite amount of resources that it steals from the people, but still it's kind of infinite, and an infinite amount of power as well. So that's, in the view of women, the husband, the ideal husband, because it has a great amount of resources and power. And I wrote, but women, and here women, these are not just empirical women, these are metaphysical, feminine, the metaphysical feminine. The men can be metaphysically feminine, in a way. And I wrote, women, in this sense, they are faithful to the state as long as it is vigorous. And in modernity, it is not. The state, the state, as of now, we are in 2023, has the biggest penis, but it's a flaccid penis. The libertarians, they have a smaller penis, symbolically, but it's much more vigorous. Yeah. And I wrote, the libertarians in the modern West, they are the only ideologically masculine men in the West. Even in radical right circles, a lot of people are ideologically feminine or womanish. They expect a strong man to solve the problems. That's a feminine mindset. People who root for, the Westerners who root for Putin or for Trump, independently of the political, economic reasons, but symbolically, it's a submission to a strong authority figure. That's why Trump or Putin are so appealing to a lot of right-wing people, because they embody strength and vigor and masculinity. But precisely, a real masculine man, he doesn't want to bow down to another stronger man. He wants to become his own strong man, but not in a domineering way, but with a reciprocal respect for other free masculine men. And that's the ideal of libertarianism. The libertarians, they don't want to rule over others, but they don't want to be ruled over either. That's why they are the most masculine, the libertarians, because they are not necessarily masculine in terms of showing off or being a classical figures of authoritarianism, etc., but they are much more masculine metaphysically, because the ideal that they promote is simply self-governing political units and self-ruling individuals within free communities, and that's really masculinity. Yeah, that's why they are the most vigorous. They are those who produce the best intellectual content in terms of economics and politics, whereas a lot of radical right-wingers, they really are, they just repeat some of the old ideas. But the libertarians, because they are masculine and vigorous, they have to prove their worth in a way, and that's why they are struggling against the flaccid penis of the state, symbolically. Yeah. And I wrote, the Anglo-Saxons historically have been, in my view, the most masculine people, because they have been self-governing, whether in England, the US, and to a certain extent Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc., with the formal domination of the English crown, but actually, wherever the Anglo-Saxons have settled, they have implemented self-governing to the greatest extent possible, self-governing political entities. And the most shining example has been the US. And that's why the Anglo-Saxons here, I have to praise them. I'm not always on their side on all topics, but here, politically, the Anglo-Saxons, they are the most masculine, the most mature, historically. The French, they have had tendency towards collective political insanity, the Germans as well. There are other countries or civilizations or peoples which have been very successful, but in an authoritarian way. The Anglo-Saxons, they have been politically successful while granting the greatest amount of liberty to their citizens. The Swiss as well, they can be included, the Swiss. Yeah. I wrote, there are significant amount of nationalist or patriotic women, but very few libertarian women, or if they are not as numerous or as numerous as leftist or on the right side patriotic or nationalist women, precisely because women, they can't be libertarians, precisely because they have to rely on a man. Women can be the wives or the supporters of a libertarian man, but they have to rely on the masculine figure in a way. It's not a hindrance to the libertarian movement, but simply libertarianism really is metaphysically, it's really a masculine ideology, because the ideal is self-rule, not to depend onto anyone else, to be independent. It doesn't mean autarky. It doesn't mean to live like Robinson Crusoe. It means to be politically, individually, psychologically self-reliant. Yeah, and that's what women can't do metaphysically. The so-called independent women, they live within an extremely complex network of bureaucratic regulations, restrictions, redistribution. Yeah, that's why I wrote socialism, whether it's national, democratic, or proletarian, or international, or whatever, is a feminine ideology, because symbolically people, they just want to suckle the teats of the state. So here the state is kind of the feminine archetype. They just want to suck up the resources from the state. Yeah, I wrote the libertarians, they are the only vigorous, not the only, but the most vigorous intellectuals in the West. Yeah. Which makes them eventually attractive to women, because here, a little bit of pop culture, the Titanic, I thought about this already 5 years ago, but yeah, Rose and Jake, in the movie The Titanic, Rose, she's to be married, or she's married, I don't know, but she's with a guy who is from the bourgeoisie or the nobility or whatever, who is very wealthy, rich, good family, etc., etc. But he's kind of boring. And the vigorous working class Jake is much more appealing, because precisely he has more vigor. He has less resources, status, etc. But he has the vigor, the energy of the working class man. And that's why he that's why he gets the lady, because he's more vigorous. Yeah. So if you want to pick up chicks from a political standpoint, you have to adopt a vigorous ideology, and libertarianism is more masculine than all forms of collectivism, whether left-wing or right-wing. Yeah. It sounds like a joke, but it's partly what I've been talking about, the sexual energy and politics. It's partly a joke. It's partly a joke, but but it's partly serious nonetheless. There is an aspect. It's not meaningless. I have said intelligent things. I have said intelligent things. Yeah. Now about religion and ethics. I will show the document briefly again. I will comment systematically once I have finished with the introduction. Jefferson was a vigorous, masculine man, not in the sense of a strong authoritarian figure, maybe not very charismatic in terms of showing off, but he was very strong, like all the founders which built the US, very strong nonetheless, in a different way, in a more subtle way, in a more subtle way. But to have built the United States of America, it took a lot of balls. Yeah. So about religion and ethics, I read my notes. Historically, the purpose of the ethical aspect of religion is to solve what, in the language of evolutionary psychology, can be termed evolutionarily adaptive problems. namely the purpose of the ethical teachings of all religions is to solve problems, individual and collective problems, how to adapt individual behavior to the collective and how to adapt the collective to its environment, social, natural, economic, political environment. So the form and the content are distinct. The form is, in the case of ethics, an individual and or collective life discipline. That's the formal aspect. Ethics is formally to lead an ethical life. Formally means to live a life according to principles and to be disciplined. Yeah. The content are the various tasks, deeds, rituals to follow, or the specific principles to obey. So formally, to be ethical and to behave ethically means to act while obeying principles, and then the content, the various principles or the various specific tasks which have to be performed, this is precisely the content. Yeah. So I wrote, living a life according to rules and principles, in a way, most of the time it's good, because it means that you think about what you do. You do not act instinctively, or most of the time you try to act according to a rule, so you have a guiding principle. You are following a set of rules, you are following a code of ethics, and in a way that's good because it is rational. You do not act mindlessly, you do not act instinctively. You can partly because it's ethics is a way of taming, domesticating in a good sense. Most of the time, here Nietzsche would say precisely, no, Christianity has tried to tame and domesticate good, vital instincts. That's why it has to be removed, because it has put how do you call this? It's a hindrance to the expression of the vital instincts. Yeah, that's the Nietzschean view. So Christianity is excessive because it's in a Nietzschean view because it's hostile to healthy vital instincts. Yeah. In this book, Nietzsche praises Buddhism. The Buddha as a great proponent of diet and hygiene and yeah. So yeah, to live a life or to lead a life while obeying rules and principles, in a way it is good in most cases, because then of course the content, yeah, it's good because it is rational, but then of course the content has to be good, but just the formal aspect, to live an ethical life, that which all religious people are supposed to do, and there can be atheist people who lead a principled life, and there can be formally religious people who do not care at all, but usually religious people, the ethical aspect consists precisely in leading a life according to rules. But I wrote, but the content, namely the specific tasks which have to be performed, has to be adapted. And here I take an example. The rules, some of the rules of the Jews or the Christians or the Muslims regarding diet, for instance, historically, here that's an empirical, rational, in a sense of scientific view of the ethics of religion, they were designed, so the rules regarding diet, for instance, were designed in a specific evolutionary niche, a specific evolutionary environment, to solve an adaptive problem. Example, the prohibition regarding the consumption of certain animals or hygiene rules, etc., in the context in which they were born, in the historical perspective, it had meaning and it was useful because it solved an adaptive problem. The rules of the Jews or the Muslims, they were a response in a chronological perspective, a response to a specific problem that the Jewish tribes or the Muslim, the Arabic tribes encountered in their Middle Eastern environment, and therefore it made a lot of sense because it offered a solution to problems. The rules of hygiene, diet, etc. And then later the rules of ethics in the sense of interpersonal relationship. Yeah. So in this sense, it's rational from a scientific perspective, because it has enabled, from a Darwinian perspective, it has enabled to solve problems. It was the best solution in most cases to solve the problems that the founders of these religions encountered in their given specific particular context. Yeah. But I wrote, if following rules, no matter how old they might be, enables to promote group cohesion, social harmony, and individual balance, then it's good. That's the purpose of ethics, actually, to promote group cohesion, individual balance, and social harmony. And following an ethical code can be, and a lot of time is, its own reward. There are those who believe that if they follow the ethical rules written in whatever book, the Torah, the New Testament, the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever text, they believe that they will be rewarded in some afterlife. But actually, in this life, following a strict ethical code, it's very often its own reward, because precisely it brings if the rules are intelligent, if it brings group cohesion, social harmony, and individual balance. And here an example: the Orthodox communities of Jews, they have really ethical rules which are very often completely at odds with modernity, or the Amish. It's completely at odds with the modern environment, but it in a way it's rewarding because it enables group cohesion, and these societies, really the radical Orthodox communities of either Christians or Jews or even Muslims, it's often a means to offer group cohesion, and the success is in the stability. Not all of them, but those who are really functioning. The example of the Amish, or some Orthodox communities, or even some Muslim communities which function while being sometimes traditionalist, one might say, without resorting to excessive means of maintaining order, one might say. But these religious communities, following their ethical code, it's its own reward, and it's often the fact is that they are very stable, and they have high birth rates. The Amish, they are an exceptional example because they really have a really strict code of ethics, but the reward, in a way, it's self-rewarding, because of course there are dysfunction like in all societies, but it's much more functioning than a lot other social groups, one might say. They have a very high birth rate. It's stable because it has maintained itself over centuries. The religious people will inherit the earth, say the Darwinian evolutionary psychologist. From a strictly Darwinian standpoint, Islam, Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, and the radical form, the fundamentalist Christianity, from a strictly Darwinian, even atheistic perspective, it's very successful. Someone like Dutton talks about this. In the long term, many centuries, those who follow really religiously the principles of in a strict way, from an evolutionary perspective, historically they have been, and they still are, being rewarded. Even if there was no God and no afterlife, etc., it would be its own reward. The Amish, let us imagine 2 or 3 centuries from now, if they keep their code of ethics, they keep increasing their numbers. They are one of the most cohesive. There are problems, of course, but they are very cohesive in comparison with the rest of America, one might say, and the rest of the Western world. So, yeah. So, but I wrote, yeah, so the formal aspect, following a set of rules which promotes group cohesion, social harmony, and individual balance is precisely the purpose of ethics. But the content, the content, of course, it's important, but in a way, here it has to be adjusted, but it's not necessarily the most important. Here I illustrate, for instance, not eating pork for the Muslims, or having to go to church on Sunday for the Christians, or praying in a specific way, whatever. Of course, it's important to the extent that it promotes group cohesion, individual balance, social harmony, etc. But here, in this case, the formal aspect, namely rigorously following a moral code, is more important than the content. Here I wrote, if you are a perfect mechanistic Christian, or mechanistic Jew, or mechanistic Muslim, so you mechanistically obey whatever code of ethics you obey, but if you behave like a jerk without breaking the formal rules of your ethical code, you completely miss the point. And I wrote, Yahweh or Allah won't be fooled. If you behave perfectly from a mechanistic standpoint, but apart from this, if you behave really like a jerk, you will not fool whoever you believe in. And the other aspect, if you make mistakes, or if you forget, or if you inadvertently, or even if you don't care about certain aspects, but if you are a decent person, that's the purpose. Actually, that's the purpose of religion, is to bring about, or to promote, to encourage people to behave decently. Then there are universal decent behavior, and they have to be particularized. There are various conditions, contexts, etc. But the ideal of religion, the purpose of all religion, is to promote decency and precisely social harmony, individual balance, and cohesion within the group. Then the extension of the group, depending on the religion, can vary. But that's the purpose. So if you behave like a decent person, a good human being, without formally or mechanistically following rules, in a way it's better than being just a mechanistic bureaucrat who rigorously obeys rules but who completely misses the point. If the formal rigor can help, and a lot of time it does help, to ethically, morally elevate people, that's good. To have a rigor, if people really need to have a strict discipline, going to the church every Sunday, not eating this, or praying in this way, or repeating this, or etc. If it helps them be more disciplined, that's good. That's the purpose. But using a respect for the formal aspect of ethics to justify dubious behaviors, whoever is in charge up above, you will not deceive the guy in charge up in the clouds. Yeah. Here I take an example. Eating local, fresh, organic products, mostly vegetables, fruits, etc., etc. That's what I have been promoting and practicing, preaching, and encouraging people to do. It helps solve an adaptive problem in the modern context, 21st century, namely in terms of health, individual health, in terms of economics, to have sustainable, autonomous, independent, in terms of at least food production, to eat local. It's a guarantee to encourage local agriculture and eating. It's a guarantee of a certain economic independence. but also it's ecological because it reduces transportation. So it has benefits in terms of health, the economy, which is tied with the political aspect, and ecology. So the individual, that would be the singular, the particular, that would be the economic, and the universal would be the relationship with the entire planet. So encouraging people to eat local, fresh, organic vegetables, fruits, etc., etc., and healthy. It's a means that the ecological ethics of the modern world, it's a means to solve an adaptive problem, to adapt to a certain context and solve a problem. So it's rational. The problem is pollution, transportation, and not deindustrialization, but delocalization of production of vital resources like food. The ecological ethics, which I agree with most of the time, it's a means to solve an adaptive problem. The problem is not the same as those that the Jewish tribes or the Arabic tribes or the early Christians or the Hindu were confronted many hundreds or thousands of years ago. They are different, but that's the same purpose. That's why the ecologists, even if they are personally atheist, they are behaving religiously for the good or the bad. But for the good, it's simply they are in search of a code of ethics which promotes individual well-being, balance, etc., social harmony, etc., etc. And I took another example of a non-religious religious behavior, being anti-racist. If you are a mechanistic leftist, there are the mechanistic Jews, the mechanistic Muslims, the mechanistic Christians, and here the mechanistic leftist. If you are perfectly politically correct, or anti-racist, anti-misogyny, tolerant, etc. But if you behave in a despicable way, you are kind of fake. And if you have a few excesses, like Trump, excessive remark about women, maybe about Hispanics sometimes, but then if you behave decently, here I'm not judging the individual, but by enacting policies which benefit everyone. Here, the example of Trump is very good, very relevant. Trump, he may be considered often despicable on an individual level because the way he talks, the remarks he makes, etc. But if you judge on what he has achieved as a president, not the individual Donald Trump, but his role with the power that was his during his mandate. I'm not an expert in the economic aspect, but as far as I know, he has been one of the best presidents for a long time as just a president, not the individual aspect, but in terms of economic policies. It has brought a lot of good for all Americans, maybe not all, but most Americans, and especially minorities. So if Trump had to be judged from an objective standpoint, he has done good to America, whereas Obama was worshipped as an individual because of what he represented symbolically, but actually maybe Obama is a very decent person as an individual, probably he's nice, he's charismatic, funny, etc. And symbolically what he represents, of course, an America which was supposed to have transcended race problems, etc., the ability of formerly discriminated minorities to rise to the highest position. Okay, the myth Obama, yeah. But then if you judge what Obama did as a president, the function, the role that he had, his policies have brought negative consequences for a lot of Americans. So, yeah. And here, another example that I took, those who are mechanistic leftists, in the sense that they obey the creed of the politically correct left. If you are perfectly correct from a formal standpoint, but then if you behave like in a despicable way, the example that I took, the remark that Mrs. Clinton made about the deplorables, Mrs. Clinton, in this case, has had the power in terms of diplomatic, geopolitical, economic, etc. power to cause a lot of negative consequences for a lot of people. But because she has been politically correct, mechanistically in a way, she can afford to trash talk the average working class American, the deplorables, which might, yeah, that's precisely the confusion. The average workers, maybe they are a little bit racist, maybe they are a little bit misogynistic, etc. But if you judge not their individual psychology, but what they do, they are those who produce the wealth, who create the goods and services, etc. So that's to illustrate the difference between the formal aspect and the content. There are a lot of people who think that because they are mechanistically perfect in their religious beliefs, not in an official sense, it can be the official religions, but even if it's the woke ideology or the leftist ideology, they think, maybe they make a lot of efforts to be formally, mechanistically perfect, but if they behave in a despicable way, it completely misses the point. Yeah. I wrote, the spirit is more important than the letter. The Muslims, Jews or Christians or other people who use their faith to justify all sorts of dubious behaviors, they might have problems at some moment. That's a joke. No, but seriously, what I mean is, self-righteousness. The people who believe themselves to be self-righteous because they obey a formal code, and then they think, oh, everything goes, everything can be acceptable because there is the formal, rigorous aspect. No. If obeying a strict, formal, what I call mechanistic code of ethics, if it's a means to become a moral person, to become a good person, that's good, of course. But it doesn't have to be an end in itself. The formal aspect of ethics is a means to attain a goal, to attain an end. And the end is to become an ethical person. That's a means to reach an end. If the formal aspect, the formal obedience to the rules becomes an end in itself, and if the goal, which is to be a decent person, is lost, if they lose sight of the goal, there is confusion. Yeah. And here I take the example of the left. The purpose of anti-racism was, and is supposed to be, to improve the living conditions of the minorities. That's the goal. And anti-racism historically was a means to attain the goal. The goal was to offer better conditions of life to black people in the US mostly, but then in other Western countries with immigrants there. But historically, the purpose of, let's call this, to simplify, the anti-racist ideology is or was to improve the lives and the conditions of black people in America at first. That was the purpose. And what has later become political correctness was at first unconsciously or sometimes consciously a means to attain this end. But there are a lot of leftists in the modern world who have completely lost sight of the goal, namely for them. They have become mechanistic leftists, so they just repeat their mantra, their anti-racist nonsense, and they have completely lost the point, namely, very often their political correctness, not only it doesn't help the people that it is supposed to help, but actually it is detrimental. That's why white leftists, they have become insane, and that's why there are a lot of right-wing conservatives who, in a way, they are more genuine. And here I take an example. The crime rates. They are the leftists, really are mechanistic, blind in the negative sense, followers of their creed, the woke, anti-racist, whatever, and they are very bigoted when it comes to the formal aspect, there are topics we shouldn't talk about, but they completely miss the point, namely that the problem with crime in America or in other Western countries, but here in the case of the US, it affects mostly black people, namely they are the first victims of crime, which is often, contrary to what is said, perpetrated by other blacks. So it hurts and affects and has detrimental effects for black neighborhoods predominantly. So someone, if they genuinely cared about the people that they pretend to care about, they would address the issue and not just blindly repeating and here I know enough about this. There are a lot of Afro-Americans who are pissed off against white liberals because precisely they say, but you are kind of fake, actually. And I agree with them in this sense. Yeah, so that's the difference between the letter and the spirit. That's why anti-racism, it's kind of fake in the sense that it's just a means for a lot of white people. I'm talking from a perspective of white people. It's a means for white people to gain social status. That's a competition that white people play. Sometimes it's a little bit dubious. It's a sick competition sometimes, but it's a competition that white people play among themselves, not in a manipulative way, although it can be, but simply because they want to attain status by showing off their morality. So there are a lot of white people who use anti-racism to gain social status for themselves. And the black people or other minorities who notice this, sometimes they are a little bit pissed off because they see that it's kind of not authentic in a way. But it's not because there are some who are ill-intentioned maybe or manipulative, but there are a lot of white people who get deceived because they just want to feel good and they just want to do good. They are a little bit naive. Yeah, but yeah. And I wrote to conclude, the purpose of all religions is simply to encourage human virtue, or at least decency. Each religion is the product of the particular context in which it flourished. There are universals, which are ageless and eternal, other particular aspects which are transient and inessential, or sometimes even detrimental. But yet the purpose of ethics is to encourage virtue and decency to the greatest extent possible. That's the goal. Yeah. And everything else, in terms of the formal code, it's just a means. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I've been talking for almost 2 hours. Maybe maybe I will stop here because there are many pages left to. Maybe I will make 2 videos. That will be the introduction, and I will record the other video in tomorrow. Yeah, because otherwise the video will be 4 hours long. 4 hours long. Yeah, I will stop there, probably. Yeah. 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 Because what I intend to talk about now is to comment the various parts. The body, the soul, the person, the individual, the citizen, and what I call the spirit. I have taken notes, so yeah, I think I will stop the video soon, and I will record a second video the day after, and I will comment systematically while giving all the references. So this video will probably serve as an introduction. That will be the first part out of 2 parts. I will probably do this. I don't want to make videos longer than 2 hours anymore. So yeah, I will probably stop here. Yeah. I will just conclude with a few pieces of advice that I have listed. Yeah, I just these are pieces of advice that I have been practicing and that I have listed. Yeah. And I will just other documents. I'll just conclude with this. There are five table boards. There are 2 others. Tried to summarize the greatest amount of relevant pieces of advice in the shortest amount of space. Yeah. That's just another one. document again. So I have tried to list in the shortest amount of time and space possible the greatest amount of relevant, intelligent, useful pieces of advice. It can be changed, modified, improved, etc. But I have been practicing the overwhelming majority of the pieces of advice. Yeah, so I will conclude the video here. So it will be the first part. I will record the second part tomorrow. I don't know when the videos will be published, but I don't know when they will be watched, by who, what will people find, but yeah, I still have a lot of things to say. So in the second video I will comment the various parts: the body, the soul, the person, the individual, the citizen, and the spirit. Yeah, and I will talk about the Greek pantheon as well. Yeah, so that's what I could say. If I wanted to make if I wanted to make a good joke to conclude, I would say, long live Nietzsche. That's a very good Nietzschean joke. Yeah. 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 That's what I could say.